This is Teachers Talk Radio, and you are listening live.
Good evening, and welcome to the Wednesday Twilight Show with Morgan Whitfield and Todd Brennan. It is Wednesday, July 3rd. Tonight, Todd and I will be discussing parenthood and teaching and how we can find the right balance, the strategies and challenges.
This is Teachers Talk Radio, and you are listening live. Tune in live at ttradio.org, or to join in the conversation, download the Podbean app and search Teachers Talk Radio. Follow the hashtag TTRadio. Tune in, talk it out with Teachers Talk Radio.
Hello, good evening. This is Morgan Whitfield, and Todd, do I have you here with us?
Yep, I think I'm okay. I think you can hear me nice and clearly.
Excellent. I'm really excited for tonight because the topic that we've chosen to discuss is actually really, really big. I think when we first proposed it, there was this feeling of, well, we could kind of eat around the edges and talk about the challenges that have to do with being a new parent and teaching at the same time. But I think I inherently had this immediate kind of feminist response, which was that there's a large kind of structural issue that goes around parenthood and teaching, the type of profession that we have, that I thought would be really, really interesting to unpack. Do you want to just, I guess, talk about our own experiences as parents and teachers?
Yeah, so I will say as well, just to add to what you've just said, I do feel a little bit of apprehension talking about this topic. Obviously, I'm coming at it from the point of view of a father, and while that's not to diminish the role, I do obviously feel that there's a slight, what should we say, a disparity in burden, particularly in the early phases. So I'm going to try my best to be measured and not put my foot right in it. But do you want to start with your experience, and then I'll kind of chime in with why I think there is something to be said about that different side of the coin, if you like.
Yeah, no, I think it's really valuable. I think part of the conversation should be that there should be both a male and female side, that there should be rather like parenthood should be looked at from two different perspectives, not just from the side of a mother. It's really important that fathers are involved in those conversations, and that there is this idea that fathers have a huge ownership and also a huge amount of life change and upheaval when they become parents as well. I guess I just start by saying I have 3 children. Right now, my kids are 3, 5, and 8. And I think in total, I breastfed solidly for about 6 years between all 3 of my kids. I felt like I was pregnant for about 20 years. But it's been having 3 kids all at young ages and just coming out of that, where the youngest is just coming out of nappies. It completely changed my life, and it changed the way that I did my job. And we had a little talk earlier, we were saying, well, is it a good or a bad change? And the thing is, it's just different. You do things differently. Do you want to talk about your family?
Yeah, I do, always and incessantly, because I am a really, really proud father, and it's something that has been absolutely transformative for me, and something that perhaps, like, unlike many young men, it was something I was very keen to do at quite a young age. So we sensibly waited till a little bit older. But we have 3 children, as yourselves, and one of the things I'm trying to work on at the minute actually is to not present that as this scary thing, because actually it is a really amazing thing. So we have a 11-month-old, a 3-year-old, and a 6-year-old, and I have no experience of breastfeeding, obviously, but the experience from a man's point of view, I think is very different, obviously. No matter how kind of much you try to share the burden and try to understand both sides of the story, I think there are slightly different expectations that are beyond societal, obviously biological necessities. You've spoken there definitely about the different experiences and the expectations. And I think just before the podcast, we kind of had a little chat about it, didn't we? And I was saying that one of the things that I felt, certainly with our first child, was that I felt a real need to do something special. I thought, gosh, I'm just kind of hanging around here. There's this amazing thing happening adjacent to me. I didn't really feel in that early stage that it was something that I was doing. It felt very much like this amazing thing my wife was doing. And it sort of it gave me this real sense that I had to achieve a role or a status or something within work or around kind of the wider perspective of life. So I think there's I'm a sample size of one, but there's definitely something very different I think happens to fathers around that time in terms of wanting to take on some responsibility. And I suppose those typical sort of the you've obviously done one of the 3 Ps, but the protect and provide aspect, I think perhaps that's again sample size of one, but perhaps that was something particular to me. But I certainly felt a real burden to increase my ability to provide and support, which obviously, one of the things I absolutely mustn't do this evening is to sound as though, woe is men, because as I've alluded to, I think the burden is definitely heavier for a new mother, particularly one working in the sector.
It's so funny because there's a few points there where I'm like, I come at it from a completely different angle. So when you said you always and incessantly talk about your family, I am so reticent when I'm at work to talk about my family. I think we've talked about this before. I think because I came back to work and I was in a leadership position, I didn't want people to think that I couldn't hack it. So I did not talk about my kids. And my late nights, when I was doing 3 or 4 feedings a night and then coming into work, I didn't want people to see the struggle. I wanted it to seem effortless so they knew that I could still take on the job. So I did kind of downplay motherhood however I could. And when you said sample size of one, the other way that we talked about doing this podcast, and we talked about how it was going to be kind of anecdotal. We talk about our own experience. But what I found is that I automatically had this need to kind of justify and triangulate my experience. So it wasn't just anecdotal. So I literally went off and I looked for research on what it was like actually for female teachers re-entering the workforce after having a baby. And I thought it was really, really fascinating because there are things that I kind of, I felt intuitively. And to see the research say the same thing, that this experience is actually pretty consistent with a pattern throughout education, I found that actually fairly comforting. But at the same time, just because it's comforting, because I know it's not just me, that doesn't mean that it's right. I think when I look at the structures that make up education, they are really inherently default male. And so as a woman trying to navigate that when you're having a child, it's really, really hard. Schools are not flexible. We run by bells. There's nothing flexible about our workplace whatsoever. It's really, really difficult to even find changes that you can make in your timetable that would allow you to have space for things like rest, breastfeeding, and kind of any reduction in workload. So I think by that kind of default, you naturally within the system of education have not set up teachers who are parenting for success, especially new parents during those first few turbulent years. What is your experience, Todd? You said that you were watching your wife kind of go through this process and trying to support her. What was it like for her, let's say your impressions of that when she was pregnant, and then also afterwards, like the changes that you found that had on your teaching in your life?
I suppose for me, in terms of, I kind of want to pick up on a few things you've said, Morgan, but quickly, I'll kind of go back to that and I'll try and remember the threads there that I wanted to come back to. There are some important things there that you've just said. So my big memory from our first child is that my wife's work were pretty supportive. They sort of outlined from a HR point of view what she needed to do and what was going to happen. But eventually, then at the end of the process, they did a calculation. And schools are businesses; they have to operate like this. That meant that she owed them a certain amount of money before she'd actually returned to work. So one of the things that had happened is that she had been slightly overpaid, and it was fractional, but it was going to come out of her first salary back. And I just remember there being a lot of kind of stress around, right, we were kind of banking on that money, now it's not there. What we're going to do about that. And that kind of detracted a little bit, I think, from her thinking about going back to work.
Oh
And it
my
also,
goodness, that is so true. There is that stress. I completely forgot about that of like, how am I going to sort this out? When does my maternity start? Like, when am I coming back? You actually think about your planning and teaching, but also financially. Yeah.
yeah. And so I remember there being a lot of those conversations. I remember as well, uh, being with the first one, confession time. I was pretty useless at the only task I had to do, which was to ensure that she was fed, that my wife was fed, and that because as a new mother, you so much of your time is focused on that. And then, of course, you've got all the peripheral things like when I get back to work, okay, where am I? Where is this group going to be up to, and what am I going to do? How am I going to catch them up, and what are they doing today, and are they being well cared for? That you actually forget the very basics of feeding yourself, or at least we found that. And it was
I think that, yeah, it's really funny actually. I tried to time my pregnancies so that they would align best with the school year, which sounds so strange, but that literally went into my thinking when we were planning our family.
uh,
Um, yeah, like
and
just,
genuinely
yeah, it was just so funny.
it was a friend's, an older friend, who'd had children of I think they were in their teen years, and she pulled me to one side and very politely she said, "You literally have one job at the minute, and that is to make sure she's healthy so that she can keep the baby healthy, and you're failing." And I sort of laughed because we had that nice relationship, but I realised immediately she was right. So, yeah, I think for my wife, her experiences were kind of being all consumed with love, but also the responsibilities around it, but also having that peripheral background concern of yeah, eventually I'll have to go back to work, and what's happening, and what are the pieces I'm going to have to pick up. So I suppose that leads nicely into what I was going to ask you, which is you've spoken, which sometimes surprises me, and maybe that's typical for a man working in education. You've spoken there about the structure being particularly male. Now, obviously, I don't suppose I would notice that in the way that you would if you were if you were correct. So, what structures would there be? Would a really really progressive and supportive school? What structures would you, in retrospect, wish that schools would implement? Because you and I both have some say in these matters in schools. What things should schools perhaps be looking to change? Do you think?
I think that there's structures that are kind of like, for instance, the physical layout of a school, for instance. I have worked in schools where I've just had a baby and I've had to breast pump, like I've had to like use a pump in a closet, or in a bathroom. And then I worked at a school where they had a breastfeeding room that I had a key to, and two other breastfeeding moms had a key to, so we know we wouldn't be disturbed. It had a couch. It had a small refrigerator there so that we could store our milk. It had a fan in there, and it
Mm.
had a desk so that we could work while we were pumping. And the difference that that made in terms of it made a huge difference in terms of like the environment that I had, the idea that I knew I had a place to go to, that no one would think it was weird that there was there was breast milk in the regular staff room fridge.
Yeah.
Little things like that actually make a huge difference. And the other thing was timing. So it's a huge deal when you're breastfeeding, when you can breastfeed. At one school, I was given the opportunity to take my breastfeeding time all in one go in the morning. But breasts don't work like that. Like, you can't just do all your pumping the first hour of the day. Disaster will ensue if you do.
Yeah.
So I think that there's this idea that you can control the female body, and that's just not nice to kind of constrain it in that way. And we don't have the same kind of flexibility when you have 25 kids that you are with in a classroom. you can't just leave them. It's really rare that you live your life by bells. And so the structure of the school day means that often there's no one that can come to replace you very easily if you have to go take care of something. And that also goes for while you're pregnant. So when you're pregnant, if you feel ill, if you're pregnant, and you're nauseous, there are things that just make it really difficult because you have a timetable that is extremely rigid. I don't think there's any other job that's as prescribed about the timings of things, and where you absolutely cannot leave because you are in charge of safeguarding a large group of children. So because of that, it's really, really difficult to physically be in a space where you have those restrictions. I know I talk a lot about breastfeeding. It's not just about breastfeeding, though. But I think that's just one very visible, very, very visible thing that new mothers go through.
And also, there's a timing issue there. I mean, is it metastasis? Oh, I'm going to get that. I've butchered that, haven't I? There's a you can have a health. Thank you.
Yeah. So
you can have a health complication if you get your timing wrong, can't you? So there's an actual.
You can.
There's a not a bottleneck, but there's a time limitation there that actually makes that really important. And again, as we're talking, I won't include myself in this because I'm a baby timetabler, but it comes back to one of our first episodes with Riz, doesn't it? The absolute gold dust of a really good timetabler, because we're going to put you near to this room, we're going to put you in this area, and we're going to try and keep you free at these types of intervals. It might not be perfect, but it's the best we can do in the circumstances.
It does make a huge difference. I remember doing
or even working with older groups. Sorry to interrupt. If you're placed with older groups, there's a little bit more responsibility and understanding. Miss has got a thing quickly, we'll just do our independent task, an A-level group or such. Sorry, please carry on.
No, that's exactly it. So when I was at a sixth form and I was looking at rooming, one of the things that I did for rooming for the timetable the previous year is I knew that I had 2 ladies who were expecting, and I put them on the bottom floor so that they wouldn't need to walk up and down the stairs. So like simple things like that. I've had lots of like really great experiences. So for instance, when I think it's really good not to sanitize some of the language, like when you're breastfeeding and you don't pump every 2 hours, then it's actually quite awkward. Like you can leak, your breasts become really, really engorged, and it's physically painful. It hurts. If you get mastitis, it's like an infection. It's really quite dangerous. So it's really bad to kind of leave that for a long time, and it's not comfortable at all. Whenever I was in trouble, I remember once I just put into, I emailed a few members of SLT when I said, can I please have some help to cover my class? And I was amazed because within 5 minutes, I think I had 5 members of SLT come to my classroom door to say that they would relieve me of my class so that I could go pump. Which is amazing. But I think it's always best not to just depend on kindness, but to actually have things in policy. So one of the things that I've kind of fought for is to make sure, for instance, that pregnant ladies are able to have parking close to the school. We had one teacher who was pregnant who was walking quite a long way in the heat to come into work every single day. And it was a fight to actually get her a parking space that was right beside the school entrance so that she could just come right into work. Because near the end of those like 9 months, it is really hard to walk anywhere and to walk up and down stairs. And building that into policy so it's normalized. Also duties. We're asking pregnant women to stand for half-hour times when they're in the middle of a busy day. It should be policy to make sure that you offer a pregnant person the opportunity to opt out of duties. It is a tremendous, you are so tired when you are pregnant. I've had 3 pregnancies. 2 of them were very easy and 1 of them was not. And it's different for every single woman and it's different for every single pregnancy. But you don't want to put someone in a position where they are kind of working so hard to physically do their job. So you try to, I guess, again, create those structures of support, and you anticipate needs without making a person feel bad that they have to ask for some type of special treatment.
Yeah, I mean, you're essentially walking around with a roughly a 10 kg weighted vest that is also a hot water bottle, and
and it kicks you, Todd, and it kicks you.
Yeah. Which, if you sold it as gym gear, nobody would buy it. It's really hot,
Yeah.
it kicks you, and it weighs 10 kg. The 10 kg bit is enough. That's people would see that as, oh, I'll add some challenge to my workout, but that's your day, all day, every day. When you're pregnant. So, no, I think you're right, and I think timetabling that in, such and such a body can be on emergency cover, because you would normally have corridor duties in lessons, or in many schools you would, where someone's walking around, they're on call. Well, part of that could be on call, a supportive measure. And then, you've also mentioned there about the heat. We're in a context where maternity is 3 months, 12 weeks, roughly.
So maternity, where we are, is 8 weeks.
Mm.
Um, and just for context, you are not allowed to sell a puppy or take it away from its mother until it's 12 weeks.
Yeah.
So with my three kids, with all three of them, I took 4 months maternity, and I came back after 4 months for all of them.
Yeah.
And I really cannot believe that I did that now. Like, I think, and no matter what time you come back, it always feels way too soon. My sister, she had a year off. She works in Canada. She had a year off, and she dreaded that first day back to work. I dreaded the first day back to work with all three of mine. It just feels like you don't want to be kind of taken away from your child. You still feel so attached, and you worry about them. So there's like this emotional kind of trigger that, especially those very first few weeks back, I think, where you physically miss your child and you feel a massive amount of guilt. I was doing some
Yeah.
reading before, and there was this one study that I read, and it was talking about how, with women returning back to work, there's kind of two things that you kind of have to take into account. The first is that a woman's body is actually changed. So their body is doing different things and it's recovering still. And there's an emotional side to that as well. There's an emotional recovery and a physical recovery, but you're still expected to do a highly demanding job. And then the other thing that exists are these societal pressures that produce guilt. So you feel like you have a commitment towards your job, and you also have a commitment towards motherhood, and those are seen as kind of diametrically opposed. It's really, really hard. Yeah, I think that one of the things to remember is that the pregnant body, just as an entity, it's stereotyped and associated with sick leave. But pregnancy itself isn't like a pathology. Like, they actually find that you overcompensate and try not to show how sick you are or how hard it is, because you want people to think that you are still doing just as good a job. And you definitely have to do that, I think, for kids as well. Like, you often have to perform for kids that you are more okay, and give them the same energy, because they don't realize, and you have to make sure that you're doing the correct behavior management, or that they realize you're giving them quality feedback, that you can still give them confidence. There's a lot that you have to give in the classroom to be present, that you just can't drop. So you do have to keep this facade, even if you are kind of feeling like run down when you're pregnant and then after you've delivered a baby.
Yeah, and the reason that I asked is that, I was thinking then as you were talking that actually my partner's experience was in the UK, and now this is 6 years ago. My memory's not great for these types of things, but I think it was 9 months, and it was certainly even that it felt a little early to be going back, even within 9 months. So, you know, the framework here is obviously based around a different set of rules, but it's worth just kind of explaining that when you're talking about these experiences, yeah, it's a shorter time frame, but actually even that 9 months time frame, I remember it being quite challenging. And I also remember a colleague coming back and thinking that this was really silly. And again, not to criticise the school, because so much of this is normalised and it's societal rather than schools, and I certainly won't be naming them. But she came back and she was easily the best planner in the department, and we had about 2 months left, and the person who'd been covering her was in post the following year. And so there wasn't really any teaching to do, but she was expected to come into the building and teach some lessons. And I just remember thinking, surely this can be done in a much more flexible way. You've got this amazing planner who probably just wants to be with her child. I don't know what the safety rules would be about the child coming into school, but I'm sure no one would actually mind if that was possible. And if she was given the responsibility of, look, could you replan in your own timeframes? You complete flexibility. You need to be back at work legally, and you want to be back at work to some extent. But it struck me, that experience, that had she wanted to and had the conversation happened with her, wouldn't it have been better for her to actually been given some flexibility about producing something useful for everyone with her amazing talent, rather than being forced to kind of essentially sort of dip in and out of someone else's lessons and kind of
So
pick up some.
performative work as opposed to quality work.
Do you know what I mean? There was
Yeah.
elements of it that she certainly felt were performative, and outside looking in, it did appear to be. Although I know that wouldn't have been the intention, because the school was so efficient and so it was a phenomenal school. But I wonder if, as we've just come out of that COVID experience of, we're all essentially working very flexibly. Is there perhaps a dynamic shift that we need to make here, where we look at what flexible approaches to return can there be? Because, as you've pointed out, just getting you straight back into the classroom on your full timetable, or even a partial timetable, I think is it 80% here? I can't remember what it is in the UK. It is a real challenge logistically for the entire school, and physically, mentally, gosh, even spiritually for the individual trying to perform it. Sorry, I've
I
said a
think
lot of
that's
things there, but
no, no, no.
the flexible aspect is what I'm thinking of.
I think that you bring up a really good point, and I think it goes back to the idea that we have structures in the school system that we are really reticent to change, and they're very much based upon, like, there's a 40-hour work week. It starts at this time. When you clock in at this time. And again, we work our systems on where students are, and the system that they walk through. They are answered to bells, and we have to be in certain rooms in certain times. And we haven't yet gotten to the point where we can reconceptualize our jobs into beyond just standing in front of kids in the classroom, because our job is so much more than that. Our job is planning. So would it be great to have someone who is, while they're on coming back partially from maternity leave, can we give them a job that is planning? They can take on department planning, or they can take on doing CPD. And there's different ways that we could kind of make the job something else to add to the richness of our learning environments, but we
Particularly,
don't. Yeah,
particularly if
we
that
look at them
came through
mechanically.
particularly if that came through a dialogue with them and an identification of their strengths. Because, of course, the process of having a child and bringing a child into the world does bring a richness, and particularly, I think, and I'm going to bring this back round at some point, when it's spoken about at work, I think it there's a richness that comes from those conversations. And I understand your point earlier, and we will come back to it, but there's so much more that can be offered. And I think if there was a dialogue about some sort of staged return to the full role, I think the school community benefits. And often when I'm having these types of conversations with people, what surprises me is that what would be beneficial in terms of finances for a school, efficiency for a school, community grit, staff well-being, often also aligns with individual needs that we're, as you said, we're reticent to change structures, but the individual needs and those outcomes that the structures are designed to serve, they often seem to work together. So I'll give you an example, and without going too political, in the UK, obviously, we have concerns around healthcare systems. And what often surprises me when the different sides of our parliament are talking is that one side typically is categorized as caring also a lot about capital, and the other one much more about social matters, but the two are deeply intertwined. A very healthy society generally produces goods and services which are worthy of paying good prices for, and therefore capital is produced. And I feel like that a little bit with this issue in schools. If you are sitting down in dialogue with returning teachers, returning mothers, and even fathers to a lesser extent, because the paternity tends to be shorter, and again we can pick up on that. But I think if you're in dialogue with them about how they can offer the most value while maintaining this vital moment in their life, this connection with their child, I think everyone wins. And we're a bit of a juggernaut when it comes to turning around on these matters, aren't we? So no, just sorry, go on.
There's so much there. I think that's really key. I think that we don't see our jobs as flexible at all, and we also don't feel empowered a lot of the times to say we should change the structure. We don't feel like that's a negotiation, that our job is a very, very stagnant thing. And I think it's also what we incentivize. Like if we are incentivizing, let's say, exam results, that means that you come back and you're teaching a full timetable because you need to get like 35% A star to A's and 60% like C's to B's, that kind of thing. Like I think we prioritize those incentives, and we don't prioritize like student well-being, staff well-being, or the longevity of a person within the profession. I'm going to take a break now. So we're just going to quickly have an ad break, and feel free to ask some questions, to text in. We'd love to hear some other perspectives.
Hi teachers, we're Apps for Good, and we give schools like yours free introductory computing courses. Our courses are for everyone, including those who aren't computing teachers, and they're fully equipped with resources mapped to the UK computing curriculum. Independent learning is central to our courses. Your students will develop essential and digital skills by working in teams to create prototype apps for good. We'll even connect you with industry volunteers to give real-world feedback. Let's empower every young person you teach to shape their future with technology. Speak to us at www.appsforgood.org. Imagine having your own instructional coach available 24/7. Now you can with the Teaching How-Tos platform. This highly personalised social platform empowers busy teachers to learn and apply evidence-based teaching techniques, either independently, working collaboratively with their peers, or with our new AI assistant. The platform features over 160 visual guides to teaching techniques, designed to help you quickly and easily implement high-impact practices that boost student engagement and improve learning outcomes. Join over 200 institutions worldwide that are elevating their teaching practices with the How-To app. No gurus, just practical support anytime you need it. Interested in finding out more? Visit teachinghowtos.com and register for our next webinar.
Empowering education with Easy for You, where innovation meets accessibility. Our subscription-based offering not only equips schools with cutting-edge devices, but revolutionizes the learning experience by eliminating financial barriers, streamlining support, and embracing technology. We're not just providing tools, we're shaping a future where every student can thrive, unburdened by limitations. Easy for You, transforming education, one device at a time. Find out more at www.easyforyou.school.
This show is brought to you in partnership with John Catt Educational, publishers of professional development books and resources that support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. Don't miss out. Level up your professional development today and visit johncattbookshop.com to explore the full range of titles. Use the code JCTTR2425 for 20% off your order. Happy reading.
Are you looking for best practices and innovative strategies to foster confident, lifelong readers? Watch sessions by thought leaders in education, literacy experts, and EdTech specialists from the International Reading Conference for free. The lineup included renowned speakers such as TV personality and education expert Basit Siddiqui, and beloved children's author Michael Rosen. The three-day conference explored a range of topics at the forefront of the current educational landscape, with sessions relevant for all educators and key stages. Sign up to receive the recordings for free by visiting the Reading Solutions UK website at readingsolutionsuk.co.uk.
Welcome back. This is the Wednesday Twilight Show with Morgan and Todd, and we are discussing parenthood, new parenthood, and teaching. Todd, what did you want to start with now that we're back from the ad break?
Yeah, sorry. So I think I was going to do this earlier, but actually it's good now that we've kind of set the picture of the climate and culture and the sort of the norms around this. But you mentioned earlier briefly that you, I don't want to misquote you, so there's a reticence about mentioning motherhood and mentioning your children at work. It seemed to be that you were saying that it was to do with not wanting people to think that you were too busy or too tired or less effective or less efficient. Is that the kind of the thought process, and is that something you still do? Was that something you were advised to do? Could you just talk a little bit about that? Because I suppose from my point of view, it's very surprising. For me, returning, it felt like this amazing thing that I had to share, and my only nervousness was around not talking about it all the time, because I remember before I had children thinking, stop showing me photos of your children, they all look like like they all look like Churchill. I don't need to see another little tiny Churchill in a play suit. And then I just remember thinking, right, it's just Churchill. You just love it a lot. Don't show the baby Churchill to everyone. Just keep talking about other things, and then it would come up again. So that was my only kind of reluctance, was to not constantly be showing the pictures. So could you just speak to that? Because I think, particularly for a lot of fathers, I think maybe it would be less so for mothers, I don't know. But I think that's quite surprising. I don't know if it's good advice for others to follow, or if you've reflected on that. But I think it's quite unusual for certainly from my experience, and again, sample size of one.
So I actually have reflected on it quite a lot. So I was asked to write something for like a piece that went into a friend's book, and it was about advice that you would give to women in education who wanted to be leaders. And that was one of the pieces of advice that I gave. And it sounds so antiquated and awful, but there's kind of two things about fatherhood that I would say. I'd say that fatherhood tends to be invisible when it happens. So literally, a father can become a father, go back to work the next week, and you wouldn't necessarily know it unless he talked about it. And they can be going through it. There tends to be invisibility. You don't see the work that that parent is putting in at home at night, doing the feedings, like being up with the baby, like trying to help out a mother who's just come home from the hospital. I think that there is an invisibility to fatherhood that a lot of times you don't see because fathers aren't expected to show it as much. There's kind of that kind of maybe gendered norm,
and certainly I would say,
but also it just isn't as visible.
Yeah, and certainly when you do show it, it's very much in the man flu category. It's very
Yeah.
much, if you say, I'm really tired today, I was up late last night helping out with the baby. Oh, helping, were you? Helping. and fair enough, fair enough.
I
But
think it makes you look good though, like not to be mean, but I think it makes fathers look good. So when you say I was up late helping with the baby, you're like, oh my goodness, he was up late helping with the baby.
Yeah.
And I think for women, it's very different. Like if
Okay.
I said, oh, I was up late helping with the baby, that's me complaining. That's me being disorganized. That's me not being my best at work. That's me saying that perhaps I'm not going to be on top of things today. And this is my excuse that I'm preempting that with. So, me not talking about my kids and not talking about the experience of motherhood is it's my way of protecting myself and actually trying to keep this veneer of professionalism. So, it was
I'm
something,
sorry to ruin
yeah.
your flow there again. Sorry, but
No, no problem.
how much of that do you think is you? And I really don't mean that as an attack in any way, shape, or form. Because whenever I hear that at work, my first thought, and again, sample size of one, is this person is phenomenal. That genuinely, I think, brilliant. Wow, can't believe you're doing it. And if anything, I'm thinking, certainly now in a leadership role, I'm thinking, is there anything I can do to support this individual? But the first thought is not the ones you named, but rather this person is a wonder. And
Well,
yeah, it would be
yeah.
a much more positive response internally. I wouldn't say it because I think it'd seem quite patronizing, but it would certainly be something I'd think.
I think that like there's this idea that like, oh, there's perception and there's reality. And perhaps I did like my perception of that was that others would think less of me. And that could be real or imagined. But I think when you look like it's not just like an anecdote of one. We can see that when you become a mother, it does hold you back. So the job is still waiting for you, but your progression has stalled and you also lose momentum. And I definitely felt that whenever I had a child, that my momentum in terms of moving up in my career stuttered or stalled. And I found that extremely frustrating. And it feels like I'm not supposed to say that I was frustrated by that. But then I also know that it's a lived reality. A few months ago, I went to a breast cancer awareness tea, and I bumped into a whole bunch of friends that I used to work with at other schools. And I was sitting with someone who was like a vice principal, a deputy head, an assistant head, a head of department, a director. And we had all within the past 5 years become mothers. And what was amazing is we had all become mothers kind of relatively later in our careers. And we were in positions of leadership. But all of us at one point or another had to step down because we couldn't. It just wasn't possible. So to think that there was 5, 6, 7 of us around that table that were in leadership positions, but we needed to step down because it wasn't possible to balance that with work. And again, that's a small sample size, but also I think a strong sample size, because maybe that speaks to like the context, the type of school we were working at, of where we're living. But yeah, I think when it hit us that that was something that we all had in common, it was actually quite hurtful, because it made us realize that we were working in a system that was very actively stopping us from progressing. And it wasn't just something that was imagined, that motherhood could hold us back. It wasn't an imagined fear. It was a real fear that was happening, that we were living through, and that it wasn't just something that was a figment or a nightmare, that it was something that was in actuality happening. And I think there's something about that. Like I remember thinking, okay, I'm a feminist. And I believe that I can do it all. I was sold this idea that I can do it all. But I think you're soon brought to the reality that you really can't, that you only have like a finite amount of resources to give. And you are kind of judged if you're not giving them to your kids. It's really hard to say, no, I've decided to like put my career first. There's all the expectation, like the lived reality, that you do have to do every single parents' evening. How can you not do year 8 parents' evening? Every other teacher is doing year 8 parents' meeting. So there's a lot, sorry, that I know I've kind of gone on a bit, but there's a lot there in terms of what you are living through, and the kind of strength that you want to build as armor around you.
Yeah. No, and I think it's good to kind of to lay it all out. You know, you've said go on a bit, but you're laying it all out, and actually, you know, for potentially for male leaders, I think listening, I think one of the great things about conversations like this is that we all have bots, you know, and I think sometimes when I talk about fatherhood, I think some women are quite surprised. You know, I'll give you a really silly example. We lived in an apartment that had a balcony not so long ago,
Mm-hmm.
and a normal person would think, I need to make sure the child can't climb over that balcony. I got to a point where I was so worried about various things that could go wrong that I went through, what if there was a terror attack?
Oh my
Would we
goodness, the
be able,
catastrophizing. Yes, I totally understand this.
would I be able to get everybody out and down from the balcony of the 7th floor apartment that we're on? But then equally, what if someone came in from the balcony? How would I? And I just remember thinking, my brain has internalized this protect aspect a little too well. And that was a bit of a moment of seeing myself as utterly ridiculous, and therefore liberating myself from that a little bit. But I remember telling that to a female colleague and thinking, oh God, I know this is silly. But she said, are you genuinely worrying on quite a frequent basis about people attacking your family? And it's, yes. And I think that's quite common speaking to other dads. I know of one father in my friendship group who will use it as motivation when he's running. So he'll say, you know, say he's a mile out from home. He said, they're being attacked now, go. Put on the afterburners and
Oh my
really
gosh,
sprint.
that is so dark, Todd.
No, I know, but I think this is quite
yeah.
common for new fathers. So I think in laying these things out, it's probably quite useful to understand where these thought, where the everyone's experiences are coming from, and also where perhaps then things can be altered and adjusted. Because the two examples I've given there are obviously silly, and they're friends presenting their silly thoughts and silly experiences. But the point is that when you're laying out all of those things, you probably didn't know that some of your male colleagues were thinking, on the rare occasions when you said, "I'm tired, it's been a hard night," they were thinking, "This woman's phenomenal," because they wouldn't say it. It's a strange thing to say, isn't it? So it's useful, I think, to open these conversations with that type of laying everything out. As well, from a systems and processes point of view, a few of the things that you've pointed out there, they speak to climate and culture, obviously, of a school. And they speak a lot to the processes that are in place. One thing that you said as well there was that you all took a step back at the time, and obviously there's a 2-month return window that obviously is not potentially supporting coming back at the same level that you were at previously.
Yeah, definitely. I
Yeah.
think that was the thing. A short maternity leave, almost like it almost sets you up for failure. It's really hard.
And here there is, the way the system's set up here is obviously fantastic in a number of ways, and there are ways in which schools can support staff to take a slightly diminished, or I think by the end quite heavily diminished version of their salary, but it doesn't necessarily map onto countries where perhaps women have for longer been in those types of roles. Potentially, again, don't really know on any great scale, and Britain isn't really comparable to the Nordic, the Scandinavian countries on that one either. I want your reflection on what you think about having done that now, and I am quite surprised, Morgan, I must admit, to hear that you would recommend it as a thing to other women returning from motherhood, and I'll just try and lay out why I'm quite surprised by that. For me, sharing your experiences as a mother and as a father, what I've found is that it helps to illuminate for staff that don't, for whatever reason, they don't want to or aren't able to have children, some of the experiences that parents have, and why potentially some parents are extremely protective over their child in situations that don't seem to justify it, or why they find it hard to see that this child has made a significant error. I can picture, as I'm sure you can, holding my children in my arms for the first time, and that overwhelming feeling of, I never thought it was possible to love something something this much, and you never really fully understand that experience. It's quite hard to assimilate it with the rest of your life and your experience of love before. Of course, you love your partner and you love the person you marry, but it is a very different experience. And I think when I've laid that out for staff members who don't have children, they've later said to me, it actually makes quite a lot of sense now why some of these parents struggle to accept what their child has done, and struggle to accept that something is the case. They've said to me, I can't imagine what that is like, to hold something in your hands and love it more than anything ever. And it is a very difficult experience to understand, but I think as a community of teachers, we gain from that. And obviously, I can understand the self-protective mechanism there that the structures necessitate. But yeah, I am quite surprised to hear that, because it would certainly be something that I think is such a phenomenal experience to share, and it's a huge benefit to others. But you really feel strongly that it is something that can be deleterious to your own prospects, and also to your own joy of work as well, if you're then being criticised for not being all that you can be as a mother in the workplace, or at least feel that that's the atmosphere around talking about it. So sorry,
I think it's, yeah,
I've
yeah.
laid out a lot of
It's really
things.
hard because I have really conflicted feelings. So my advice is, don't talk about, like, it's not like never talk about your kids, but I was very conscious to never complain about any extra burdens that motherhood may put on me, because I wanted to kind of maintain this veneer for my job. But at the same time, I feel like it got me into a position in leadership where I could advocate for structural change. So I could advocate for those changes in policy, for mothers to not have duties, for mothers to be taken off cover, for mothers to have like no huge distance to walk, like from their cars to the school, to give more understanding and care for mothers to leave right after work when they need to, that they could do meetings online that were school-based meetings. And it also comes in a huge deal. I think it comes into play a huge deal when you're in leadership and you can then advocate for bigger things. Like, for instance, having a creche in the school for staff children, having later start times, being more flexible in how you deliver those opportunities for breastfeeding, how you timetable things differently. So I feel like I didn't talk about my kids, but I advocated for mothers. And that's kind of a balancing act, because I don't think that the system that we are working in is necessarily kind to individuals unless you really advocate for policies, procedures, and for the organization itself to be kind to those individuals.
I can appreciate
That kind of has to be codified and ratified. Yeah. So I think my own personal experience, even though my advice is make sure that you don't give it as an easy weapon for someone to use against you. And I guess I do see that as a weapon that could be used against me, which is a horrible thing to say, because motherhood is beautiful and my children are everything. They're so everything that I don't feel the need to kind of expand upon it, which is really funny. I actually have this. Yeah, sorry, go ahead, Todd.
No, it's great, and genuinely, that is. I almost feel like it should be the reverse should be true. It should be it should be possible to weaponize against someone who tries to put down a person who shares their struggles or their momentary lapses as a result of all that goes along with being a new mother. Should someone try to weaponize that in and of itself should be the thing that's criticized and punished, not the initial sharing. But sorry, no, please go on, because I was really enjoying listening to you there.
No, I think it's really interesting. I do think that we need to create more structures for motherhood to be accepted within schools. But again, we're working within kind of like very, very structured ecosystems. Schools are really structured ecosystems. I thought now we just do the news. And then after the news, I think it'd be really good to take a look at strategies for new parents coming back to work, because there are definite challenges. So how can you overcome those challenges? And again, my huge belief here is that we need to change the infrastructure of schools and not put the onus on individuals to just wear themselves out trying to live up to these expectations they had for themselves pre-parenthood. But yeah, there are things that we can do to lessen those expectations on ourselves. So let's dig into that after we have a news break.
Okay.
Hi teachers, we're Apps for Good, and we give schools like yours free introductory computing courses. Our courses are for everyone, including those who aren't computing teachers, and they're fully equipped with resources mapped to the UK computing curriculum. Independent learning is central to our courses. Your students will develop essential and digital skills by working in teams to create prototype apps for good. We'll even connect you with industry volunteers to give real-world feedback. Let's empower every young person you teach to shape their future with technology. Speak to us at www.appsforgood.org. Imagine having your own instructional coach available 24/7. Now you can with the Teaching How-Tos platform. This highly personalised social platform empowers busy teachers to learn and apply evidence-based teaching techniques, either independently, working collaboratively with their peers, or with our new AI assistant. The platform features over 160 visual guides to teaching techniques, designed to help you quickly and easily implement high-impact practices that boost student engagement and improve learning outcomes. Join over 200 institutions worldwide that are elevating their teaching practices with the How-To app. No gurus, just practical support anytime you need it. Interested in finding out more? Visit teachinghowtos.com and register for our next webinar.
Empowering education with Easy for You, where innovation meets accessibility. Our subscription-based offering not only equips schools with cutting-edge devices, but revolutionises the learning experience by eliminating financial barriers, streamlining support, and embracing technology. We're not just providing tools, we're shaping a future where every student can thrive, unburdened by limitations. Easy for you, transforming education, one device at a time. Find out more at www.easyforyou.school.
This show is brought to you in partnership with John Catt Educational, publishers of professional development books and resources that support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. Don't miss out. Level up your professional development today and visit johncattbookshop.com to explore the full range of titles. Use the code JCTTR2425 for 20% off your order. Happy reading.
Are you looking for best practices and innovative strategies to foster confident, lifelong readers? Watch sessions by thought leaders in education, literacy experts, and EdTech specialists from the International Reading Conference for free. The lineup included renowned speakers such as TV personality and education expert Basit Siddiqui, and beloved children's author Michael Rosen. The three-day conference explored a range of topics at the forefront of the current educational landscape, with sessions relevant for all educators and key stages. Sign up to receive the recordings for free by visiting the Reading Solutions UK website at readingsolutionsuk.co.uk.
This is Teachers Talk Radio, and this is Teachers Talk Radio News.
Artificial intelligence is in the news after a study at a UK university conducted a real-life Turing test. The University of Reading published its findings in the PLOS ONE Science Journal. In the study, 33 alias student profiles were set up by the university's tech team. The alias students were all completing Bachelor of Science degrees in psychology across different years of study. The researchers helped the students to complete a range of exams and online assignments using unedited answers written by ChatGPT-4. Researchers found that 94% of their AI submissions slipped by the examiners unnoticed, and the AI students did better than their peers, with an 83.4% chance they could outperform a random selection of real student submissions. One of the study's authors said it should be a wake-up call for educators. A recent UNESCO survey found that less than 10% of schools worldwide have policies or guidance in place regarding generative AI. Further details of the study can be found in the PLOS ONE Science Journal. Middlesbrough Council East of England is to trial auto-enrolment for free school meals, according to the local government website. The pilot scheme will ensure automatic enrolment as a safety net for children whose families do not apply. Parents will have the right to opt out. The council said reasons for families not claiming free school meals included not understanding the application process, low levels of literacy, language barriers, and stigma. A sample of 60 Middlesbrough households found 11 eligible families were not signed up for free school meals, and the council said this meant schools missing out on thousands of pounds in funding. A similar process introduced in Sheffield in 2016 saw £3.8 million worth of extra pupil premium funding allocated as a result of auto-enrolment. The Star in Sheffield reports that universities in the city have launched litter patrols to reduce what they call end-of-term dumping. According to the article, enforcers will be out in force over the coming days as tenancies come to an end and 50,000 students move out of their rented accommodation. The joint approach by Sheffield and Hallam universities comes after residents complained about piles of rubbish left on pavements. Both universities have said that they work closely with the City Council and give regular reminders to students to put excess waste in bags neatly outside. A spokesperson went on to highlight that since 2013, students in Sheffield have raised over £1 million for the British Heart Foundation by donating items at the end of term rather than throwing them out. Schools Week reports that trusts are warning they face having to make significant redundancies and have no choice but to exclude vulnerable children following shock cuts to SEND budgets in the middle of the year. Multi-academy trusts have written to Norfolk County Council in a last-ditch bid to avoid a funding cliff edge, after learning last week how a revised approach to top-up funding would impact them. As first reported by Schools Week in January, Norfolk was not then on track to meet its government safety valve agreement. In January, it received £70 million to balance its high-needs budget, but was told to submit revised plans and to join an enhanced monitoring scheme. The Council has adjusted overall top-up funding allocations to remain within budget, but this means allocations will fall. The Council acknowledge it will create some challenges for schools. The letter, signed by the heads of 5 multi-academy trusts in the area, have revealed their shock and disappointment and stated it will result in significant redundancies. It goes on to say the effect on children will be negative in the extreme. The full article can be read on the Schools Week website. Finally, the BBC News website reports that Japanese Emperor Naruhito has returned to Oxford University as part of his state visit. The Emperor, then Crown Prince, attended Merton College, complete with security detail, during the early 1980s. A former roommate of the Emperor said he was very down to earth and didn't use a title, preferring to be called Hero whilst he completed his studies. This has been your Teachers Talk Radio News with Joe Fox.
And welcome back. This is the Wednesday Twilight Show with Morgan and Todd, and we're discussing new parenthood as a teacher. And Todd, I thought that I would start off this next section of the conversation because we want to look at strategies for success when you're returning to work as a new parent. And I thought I'd start off by just reading you a quote and then getting a reaction from you. What do you think? Are you ready?
I'm nervous, but I'm willing and ready.
Okay. So this is from teacher blog. Beth Hughes wrote this about coming back to work. She said, I wasn't quite sure how to respond when a colleague cornered me. She had just had her first child and wanted to know when it would get easier. By it, she meant the delicate juggling act of teaching a motherhood. I wanted to be honest, but not soul-crushing, and to tell her what no one had told me, that it gets way easier when you accept mediocrity. It looks a lot worse written out, but give me a minute. It's impossible to give 100% at home and 100% at school. In order for it to work, doing your best means doing the best in the moment. What do you think about that? Accepting mediocrity?
I don't think it's accepting mediocrity. I think what I would say is that what I notice, not just from my own experience, but with new mothers as well, is that there's an increased efficiency. Necessity is the mother of all invention, after all. And I think that we operate in a culture and a sector that praises. It's not grind culture or hustle culture. It's
hero culture. It's like the more that you give up, you're doing it for the good of the kids. You're a hero.
Yeah, give up more of yourself. I do Breakfast Club and I do 70-hour weeks and I do. And I think what actually certainly I realized and I've noticed in others realizing is that it's not mediocrity, it's the essentialism of the role, because you now realize that you're doing something. What's the Thomas Aquinas? You're the frame and not the picture anymore, and so you're serving this being that is completely reliant on you, and therefore you have to reduce the job to its essential aspects. But I think that's not just applicable to mothers and fathers or new mothers and fathers. I think that's applicable to the whole sector. We have Christ-like narratives that we apply to our profession, and I don't think they're very useful at times. I think it can be quite evangelical, and I think people, when they go out and they talk to others, and when people talk to you about your work, it's as though you're serving military service, and you're in Afghanistan, or when the reality is really it's a job. It's quite challenging. There's a lot of decisions to be made. There's a lot of nuance to the job that take a long time to learn. Some of the work is quite time consuming, and also we're quite nervous of efficiency. If someone came into your work tomorrow and told you that all your marking can now be done by AI, you can focus on being really good at explanation. People would laugh and say, you can't do that, that's cheating. You must slave over the books. That shows you really love the children.
It's so funny. I think we've actually had conversations about books before, like how much marking and feedback should be in books.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think it's true. Like we have to look for the efficiencies where we can find them, and we have to stop rewarding or like valorizing that hero culture where you have to give every second of your day to your job, that you have to be taking and dragging home suitcases of books to mark every single weekend. Because we do tend to see like, oh, that's something that we should be recognizing as good. But at the same time, in a profession that is rife with burnout and has lost its ability to retain great teachers, there's something really scary that we're not making it easier for new parents to re-enter the profession.
Absolutely, and I'd be a big advocate, as we've talked about before, and this is a very different podcast, but of marking long form handwritten. And I almost was about to quote Barry Smith, there, who quite frequently on Twitter will be heard saying, "I will prove that I love the children more than you, the students more than you," and he uses that as a kind of a refrain of one of the silly things that people say within the sector. But I quite like marking books. Interestingly, that's another aspect that Barry disagrees with me on. But I think it's really good. I think it's really good to do long form handwritten marking. But I also don't do things that are going to take away from being a good father, because if I'm a bad father, I'll also then be quite a bad teacher, because I'll come into work feeling really annoyed that I'm being quite a bad father. And I prioritize that over my other roles. So mediocrity, no, but I think there's a period of adjustment where people have to drop. You're forced to drop what everybody in the profession should drop, which is this. What's the classic? The meme that everyone laughs about. Teachers are like a candle; they burn out so that they can light the way for others. It's that type of mentality. It's utterly ridiculous. Yes, sorry, I'll just die over here so that you can get a decent GCSE in English literature. Look, English literature GCSEs are lovely, but I don't think anyone should be dying for them. So I think that idea of mediocrity, it's not mediocrity. It's probably what you should have been doing all along, or certainly after you'd got over that first phase of learning the job, which, look, in that first phase of learning the job, 60, 70-hour weeks, I can see it. It's a really hard job to get up and running, and I don't think we help ourselves in that aspect either, to get up and running with. But in actuality, a lot of what people do is so that they can tell people, I did the extra things, aren't I like you? And we all want to fit in, I get it. I came and I did this extra thing. There was a child who was sad, so I stayed after school and waited for them at the bus. Sometimes children are sad about things that actually they need to speak to someone properly about. You need to notify the DSL, and staff seem very keen to. Well, I sat with her. Well, okay, that was lovely, but maybe you should have told the DSL, and then once it was dealt with, followed the protocol of the school, but then not sat with her for 2 hours or whatever it is. I mean, that's probably a bad example because there's so huge complexities to a safeguarding issue like that. But, this idea that I didn't stay till 7 o'clock, therefore I'm picking my children over my work, and therefore I'm a bad teacher. If that's mediocrity, then no wonder everyone's leaving.
Well, I think it's really funny because when I think about my own experience, I learned quite early on that I had to have set boundaries. And set boundaries could just be like, I know what I will and will not do. So for instance, I knew that I wasn't going to do excursions anymore. I used to do a lot of trips for debating and Model United Nations, and I would take kids all over the world. Like we would go to Turkey, we would go to Qatar, we would go to Switzerland, we would go to New York. And I was just kind of like, that's got to stop because that's intense. And I knew that it wasn't good for me to be so far away from my family. So I just knew that that was going to be a boundary, that I wouldn't go above and beyond in that specific way anymore. But I think more than that, I did kind of change. And I think you kind of used a key word there, which was essentialism. For me, the essentialism was going away from that crazy old way of marking books. And I think it really forced me to adapt and say, okay, what do I do in the lesson to make it a very quality lesson where I am fully present with the students the entire time? And then when I go home, I will be fully present with my family. And I'd say that I didn't get this until about 4 years into motherhood, when I was about 1.5 kids in, and I still had another pregnancy on the horizon. But yeah, the idea that I will do my best when I am in the building and give it 100%. And then I have to kind of then gird my loins, go into my second shift at home and give that 100%. But I can't bring too much work home. So yeah,
I'm fascinated by the concept of a half a child there.
Yeah. So it's just like, I'm like, well, I had like, I was like, she was a small one then.
Yeah, no, I know what you mean.
Like, I think that like I changed my pedagogy. So I was just kind of like, I will do more adaptive teaching. I will do more formative assessment. And I will be really creative in how I do that. I will use more self-assessment. I will do more retrieval practice. I will ensure that there's more peer assessment so that I'm not doing as much marking, and that I'm doing like whole class feedback, for instance, as opposed to really detailed writing. I started using, especially during COVID, I started using marking codes a lot more, as opposed to like endlessly writing out the same 10 comments on students' test papers. So I think I learned how to be more efficient. And so there is kind of different strategies that you can use to make sure that you are saving time and doing the most with the least, that you are making the most impact with the least amount of your resources, because you just don't have as many resources in terms of time and energy as you may have before.
And something really simple that I did in my first sort of phase of coming back as a new father, I remember the books that used to take up my time things. I'm terribly, terribly sad, but I race myself to mark the books effectively and efficiently, and I track that because I'm a loser. But I remember thinking the books that I spend the most time on, the 6-minute, 8-minute, 10-minute books, are the ones where they've put in the least effort, and that used to really annoy me. And then when I came back from paternity, I did this radical thing where I just put them in a second pile, and I handed them back to students. I said, "This is not good effort. This is not currently worth me marking, because this isn't the best you. I'm not marking a subpar version of you when you already know this isn't your best self. Go again, bring it back to me tomorrow morning, and I will give my fullest when you have also." And I genuinely thought these kids are going to kick off. There's going to be parental complaints. What have I done? This is the tiredness. I'm being grumpy. I went home that evening quite guilty. The next day they came in, and to a man, they were GCSE students. They were all boys, but to a man, they all said, "I am sorry, you are right." And then what they gave me was worth marking. And I'd seen other people do that before, but it took the as I say, that necessity, that element of necessity, for me to actually get on with that and realize I have been wasting my time, and also encouraging students to be very lazy. Oh, I'll just do it properly when he asks me to rewrite it. I'll just stick anything in the book for now. And then also it means that when I rewrite my dirt paragraph, it'll actually be pretty easy for me to do, because I won't actually have to improve. So that was a way in which actually things got better by me doing less. And that's a strange concept in our sector. We're like boxer in Animal Farm. I will work harder. There is a problem, therefore I will work harder. Well, actually, maybe the solution is not to work harder, but to look at a fundamental structure, possibly even one that you yourself have implemented, and even one you have internalized without anybody actually ever telling you, or you should mark everything they write. Should you? I mean, who told you this? Where does it say in the policy or the procedures that that's what you must do? So I think one of the things that, just to come back to your quote, is that you then start to interrogate, what are you doing? Is it actually working? And my line manager will laugh, but one of the things I say more than anything in a school day is, what's the return on time invested? And I never used to say that. I used to say, I'll stay later. I'll do it on the train on the way home. I'll take them in the suitcase. I'll come in earlier. So dropping the boxer mentality, I don't think actually leads you to mediocrity. I think it can actually lead you to more effective methods, and actually better methods as well.
Yeah, I think it all comes back to that idea is what you're doing impactful. And I think that's the thing. Like, if you only can do three things, what are the three most impactful things that you can do? I think it's really interesting about the whole idea of resubmission, because there's all these studies, like Ron Berger's work on saying that you have to draft things several times. Like, there should be like this idea of slow teaching and this anatomy of high expectations that is set. And so if you have high expectations, like your time is valuable, you giving them your time is a valuable thing. So they have to value it in that way. And I think saying my expectations of you are so high and my time is so valuable that the input that I give you is really important. I'm taking and making space and time for you. There's something about that, I think, that is important to kind of to highlight. But yeah, it does come back to like working smart, not hard. And I think we set such high expectations for ourselves in our profession, that sometimes we don't know how to let go. I would say that there's kind of a leadership thing, a leadership lesson in this as well. I do think that like leadership needs to be more subtractive than additive. So every single new year, instead of adding initiatives onto what we already do, there has to be a way to take things away from teachers so that you are not always giving them a higher workload. You're giving them platforms or opportunities to work smarter all the time, or ways to prioritize and be more impactful. So yeah, I do think that using your time wisely and investing in those strategies that you find work for you and your students, like that can be trial and error. But yeah, we've just given a whole bunch of examples between the two of us of what made us better teachers because we knew we had to be more efficient.
Yeah. And I think as well, actually, being very effective at work and feeling very good about what you're doing at work. I was speaking to a principal actually locally not so long ago, and he was feeling that he was overworking himself. And I said to him, look, and that he was missing out on things with his children. And I said, look, the other side of this coin is that your children are seeing you being very successful and very driven, and that is inspiring in another way. So I think as your children get older, then you can start telling them these stories about, when you were born. Obviously, I wanted to be with you as much as possible. Therefore, I had to streamline some of what I did. And I think, in terms of, you've mentioned there about wanting to be really successful at work and sometimes feeling that you would be judged for that, and not wanting to. I don't want to say only be a mother, and I don't want to ever misquote you on this, but actually, I firmly believe that being successful in the domain of work is also inspiring to your own children as well. So, but I see this much more as a kind of a Mobius loop, that this is a thing that feeds itself, is that you're becoming a different type of person to who you were before, and all of that is positive. It's challenging, but all the best things are. And actually, going home to your children, and now my daughter asks me about what I've done at work, and she thinks I just read books for a living, and she thinks it's the best job in the world, but she's kind of right. But being able to say, oh, we had this boy and he's really struggling and now he's doing really well, and that's so good, Daddy, that you helped him, and I want to help him when I'm older. You start to have that plurality to your conversations. Your conversations at work, when the children ask you about your children, are beneficial to those children to see you as a fuller person, but also in both ways. So for me, it all feeds into a change in you as an individual that I don't think anyone should be scared of, and that certainly can be incredibly beneficial on all fronts. We often think about, if I'm doing well at work, I must be doing bad at home. I don't think that's necessarily the case. I think there are new and different challenges that result in you becoming a different and arguably a more rounded person. And I'm aware that for some people who don't want children, or for whatever reason cannot have children, that can feel like a an attack of some sorts, but I really don't mean that. Some of the best teachers I've ever worked with have no desire to have children, or for whatever reason cannot have children. But that's certainly been my experience, and I wouldn't say to anyone, be afraid of that, what was referred to as mediocrity, because I think it's the absolute reverse. I really do.
Yeah, I think that's all really interesting. And I don't want to say that I kind of erase my motherhood because I want to be taken more seriously, or that I feel like it'll give me less weight if I put that at the forefront of my personality. I guess I just want to make sure that I'm always seen beyond my motherhood, that it's not the very first thing that people think about me when I'm when I'm in my career, when I'm kind of like celebrating my profession at work. I think what's really interesting, as much as we want to see those structural changes to our workplace, we've spoke about having making sure that we're making allowances for new parents coming back. One of the things that we can do is we actually kind of celebrate that coming back a little bit more. I know that there are some schools that have done mentoring programs for women when they are coming back from leave, which is really, really powerful, that they do have more of a graduated return to work, which it also gives you a lot more options in terms of, well, how do I see this new role kind of working for me? I just don't think we see enough of it. And I think kind of women mentoring programs in schools, I remember once asking one of my heads, is that a thing? And she just kind of looked at me and said, it's not right now, but maybe it should be. And I think there's this idea that we do have to kind of support each other and lead the way. As much as I, again, want to keep that part of my life kind of very, very separate, because I do want to be viewed as a professional first. I think it's really important to still be an advocate for mothers, and that means kind of sticking my neck out at all the times and using the social capital that I have to make those policy changes that I think are important.
Yeah, and apologies, I really don't want to keep referencing that, because I know that I'm probably not going to be very successful in explaining your story around that. But I suppose I'm using it as an example, because I think it's a very common thing, actually, that I've certainly recognised previously. You alluded earlier to briefly mentioned creches and how schools can support. I remember before I left for the UAE, there was an all-girls school very close to my home that offered a nursery on site. And I remember thinking, I'm going to do absolutely everything I can to get to that school. And it was a really hard school to get into because it was so successful. And even though I was really happy in my workplace, that one thing was such a huge motivator for me, thinking, if I get a job there, that's transformative to my family.
It
Why?
Yeah, so I've worked at schools with and without creches, and the difference is massive. Oh my goodness, the start and end to my workday, it's completely changed when I went to a school that had a creche for my kids. It meant that I could stay after for meetings. It meant that I could drop off the kids in the morning and not have to worry about running to like get to my form room for registration. Like my entire day changed because I wasn't stressed and worried about starting and ending it. And it also made me feel like I could fully participate in meetings after school. It made me feel like I wasn't constantly failing on one end or the other because I had to dash out of a room.
Yeah, and I think from the child's perspective as well, that they really love the creche time. And obviously there's a cost for schools, but I can't understand why a school wouldn't. The return there for me would be so clear that you've now got this huge motivator where the best staff in your local area know that you're really going to support them. The best staff with children, I should say, because they might not always have children, but the best staff might not. But the best staff with children all of a sudden are incredibly motivated to get to your school, to stay at your school, and then ideally, I suppose, for them either progress at the school or keep employment at that school for a long, long time. We need to get to an ad break, and we always say it, but we can talk endlessly without stopping. Are we due that now?
Yeah, let's do an ad break and then we'll close we'll close the Twilight show. So let's just get our last ad break in.
Hi teachers, we're Apps for Good, and we give schools like yours free introductory computing courses. Our courses are for everyone, including those who aren't computing teachers, and they're fully equipped with resources mapped to the UK computing curriculum. Independent learning is central to our courses. Your students will develop essential and digital skills by working in teams to create prototype apps for good. We'll even connect you with industry volunteers to give real-world feedback. Let's empower every young person you teach to shape their future with technology. Speak to us at www.appsforgood.org. Imagine having your own instructional coach available 24/7. Now you can with the Teaching How-Tos platform. This highly personalised social platform empowers busy teachers to learn and apply evidence-based teaching techniques, either independently, working collaboratively with their peers, or with our new AI assistant. The platform features over 160 visual guides to teaching techniques, designed to help you quickly and easily implement high-impact practices that boost student engagement and improve learning outcomes. Join over 200 institutions worldwide that are elevating their teaching practices with the How-To app. No gurus, just practical support anytime you need it. Interested in finding out more? Visit teachinghowtos.com and register for our next webinar.
Empowering education with Easy for You, where innovation meets accessibility. Our subscription-based offering not only equips schools with cutting-edge devices, but revolutionizes the learning experience by eliminating financial barriers, streamlining support, and embracing technology. We're not just providing tools, we're shaping a future where every student can thrive, unburdened by limitations. Easy for You, transforming education, one device at a time. Find out more at www.easyforyou.school.
This show is brought to you in partnership with John Catt Educational, publishers of professional development books and resources that support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. Don't miss out. Level up your professional development today and visit johncattbookshop.com to explore the full range of titles. Use the code JCTTR2425 for 20% off your order. Happy reading.
Are you looking for best practices and innovative strategies to foster confident, lifelong readers? Watch sessions by thought leaders in education, literacy experts, and EdTech specialists from the International Reading Conference for free. The lineup included renowned speakers such as TV personality and education expert Basit Siddiqui, and beloved children's author Michael Rosen. The three-day conference explored a range of topics at the forefront of the current educational landscape, with sessions relevant for all educators and key stages. Sign up to receive the recordings for free by visiting the Reading Solutions UK website at readingsolutionsuk.co.uk.
Okay, you're back with Morgan and Todd, the Wednesday Twilight show, and we're just coming to an end, and I thought we would just give some final thoughts. So, Todd, why don't you go first just to wrap us up?
Well, I suppose at the end of this conversation, I'm struck by the need for leaders to kind of create a culture where returning parents feel they can bring the newborn in, can celebrate it, with a big box of chocolates or whatever it is, and celebrate the arrival, but also be supported to be, flexible and have structures in place that actually potentially even lead to them being better than they were before, and that they feel really, really valued within that community, and that it's seen as a joy by the community. I'm also really, on a personal level, delighted to have got through to the end without once making it sound like men have it just as hard and woe is us poor fathers. I think that's a personal achievement. I might put that on my LinkedIn later. Successfully got through without talking in man flu terms about being a new father.
Yeah, I think this conversation actually made me really reflective of like my own experience. I think becoming a mom, I was kind of thought that it would detract for my ability to be a good teacher, to be a good leader. And so I did keep a lot of myself hidden through that. So I think we hit kind of the nail on the head. It is changing the structures of schools so that they are more friendly to pregnant people, to new parents that are coming back, that you have the breastfeeding rooms, you have the accommodations to timetabling, to rooming, you've changed policies and procedures, you make available things like creches. And then the onus isn't on the individual to make all the changes, but on the systems to be better. There are things that we can do. So like having a change in pedagogy to look at essentialism in our teaching is really, really important, that we say, where can we make the most impact and do it there? But I think those are things that you have to find within yourself, what you think will make the most impact in your context and what's best for you. So yeah, I think that's a really great place to end. This has been a really interesting show. And I hope that we can get some more comments on it, just because it is a really rich topic, because it's the lived experience of so many teachers in the profession. Thank you so much for joining us. And we can't wait to see you 2 weeks from now on the Wednesday Twilight Show.
Thank you very much. I think it's the last ever one, is it, next time until after the summer?
Yeah, well, I think we got one more time and then we'll take a little summer break.
We'll be sorely missed, I'm sure, Morgan. Have a lovely evening.
You too.
You've been listening to Teachers Talk Radio. Tune in live and listen back at ttradio.org. We look forward to hearing from you next time on Teachers Talk Radio.